Good morning, Father Hawley. On this day, November 10th, 2019, can you tell me, Father Hawley, what is the sermon about today?
So, John, we're going to talk about the idea of redeployment, this kind of homecoming after being on a mission. We're going to talk about it in the book of Haggai and how God gives advice to folks coming home from being out on a mission and being this is Veterans Day weekend. Also talking about how we welcome veterans home and come home ourselves in ways that honor God. So, yeah, it'll be a fun jump into the book of Haggai. I dig that, y'all. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So on this Veterans Day weekend, I thought we'd talk a little bit about redeployment. Particularly, what we can learn from the nation of Israel about redeployment. So for those of you unfamiliar with the term, redeployment refers to the process of homecoming after being on a mission. Modern military deployments take service members all over the world, from Guadalcanal to Korea, Vietnam to Greenland or Grenada, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and most recently, Iraq and Afghanistan. Tours of duty can be as short as 3 months or as long as 5 years. But no matter the length, the homecoming process is always challenging. Yet God gives us some help in this process, just as he did the people of Israel so many years ago that we hear about today in the book of Haggai. So I'm going to guess that Haggai isn't high on your reading lists. So I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory before we delve into the scripture we get today. So Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians in 586 BC. And a large portion of the Jewish folks were carried off into captivity in Babylon. You might say they were deployed to Babylon. Babylon, in turn, was conquered by the Persians, who eventually redeployed the Jews to Jerusalem. Haggai is speaking somewhere around the year 520 BC, so it's been almost 70 years since the Jews have been home. And as they are trying to settle back into their hometown, we hear God give some advice. First, put away your nostalgia. King Solomon's temple was a wonder of the world, and those few Jews that could remember it must have looked at what Ezra and Nehemiah had been working on and just wept. Solomon's towers rose to over 200 feet tall and were made with the cedars of Lebanon. All Ezra and Nehemiah had managed by 520 was a foundation, still at ground level. And so whether you're an Israelite coming back to Jerusalem or a sergeant coming home from Quezon, things aren't going to be the same. You've changed. The ones you left behind have changed. The home you are returning to has changed. Be sober. Be realistic. Let go of your wistful affections of the past, for they can only poison the life you have in the present. So while God's first bit of advice is a little harsh, that second bit of advice is like a Red Bull for the soul. God tells Zerubbabel, take courage, for I am with you. The most powerful being in the universe says he's got your back. The God who led your people out of Egypt, prevented Pharaoh's army from catching you, delivered you into the promised land, that God is still with you. What's more, God has told you that your story will end well. The glory of Israel is not in the past. The glory of Israel is still yet to come. So whether you're Zerubbabel, or Francis of Assisi, or John McCain, you have to believe that God was with you in your toughest times, in those moments of captivity, and that God is going to continue to call you into greater things when you come home. And so God's last bit of advice actually comes outside the bounds of our reading today. But I'm betting on the fact that you're not going to go home and read the rest of Haggai this afternoon. And I think chances are pretty good you're not going to get another sermon on Haggai for the next dozen years or so. So I'll go ahead and tell you the rest of the story. God's final piece of advice is seek God's will as your first priority. The book of Haggai starts with the prophet telling the people to quit putting the finishing touches on their own home and start focusing on God's home of the temple. God literally says, stop with your paneling projects. It's great if you look in the Hebrew, it's actually rendered paneling. So quit with the walnuts in your rec room and focus on the temple, the house of prayer for all people. That's where your priority needs to be. On your faith life and on your local community. So whether you're Joshua, son of Jehozadak back from Persia, or Christian, the son of Jim and Vanessa back from the Middle East, the first thing you should do in your redeployment is seek God's will for your life and how best you can serve your local community. Let go of nostalgia. Take courage in God. Seek God's will as your first priority. This is solid advice for Jews rebuilding a temple. This is solid advice for any military veteran redeploying home. And honestly, this is solid advice for any of us going through a challenging season. Divorce is like a deployment. Cancer is like a deployment. Losing a rector is like a deployment. But sooner or later, we're going to make it to this other side of this season of challenge and in the wilderness. And as we look to redeploy into the world of relationships, the world of remission, or the world of a new rector, we should keep God's advice in mind. Let go of nostalgia. Take courage in God and seek God's will as our first priority. If we can do those things, I'm willing to bet that the latter splendor of this house of prayer for all people shall be even greater than the former. And to that, all God's people say, amen.